Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and it is DFS Thursday, Friday for you all listening out there. As always, I'm joined by none other than PFF Zone, the prop prophet himself, Andrew freaking Erickson. Andrew, happy week 17.
Yes, happy week 17 indeed. Happy, shout out to us. We talked about the Burrow stacks last week, and that's what you needed, man. Like, that's what you needed. I'm glad that we were able to finally hit on. I know we've been pretty good in cash, but I feel like we were pretty on top of the Bengals passing game last week, and that turned out really well.
It's a great day to be great, Andrew. It is today, and it was then as well. So I do think we might have another GPP stack for everyone against that very same Baltimore Ravens defense this week. More on that in a bit. As always, on this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast, we're going to roll through our cash game lineup first. The idea with this is that we are not trying to take down, a massive tournament, just trying to win the head-to-head, the 50-50, highest floor as possible, and we are not worried about ownership. So with all that said, Andrew, pretty easy choice at quarterback. If Jimmy G is going to miss the game with a thumb injury, which it seems like he will, Kyle Shanahan's leaving it open, Jimmy G's leaving it open, but just based on the matchup, the injury, things we're hearing from doctors, it sure seems like Trey Lance is going to be out there. I mean, if this price was $1,000 more, I think we would probably be settling on Trey Lance as our quarterback in this spot, highest team implied total of the week, but $4,800 for Trey Lance. If he's starting, I have no idea how you can get off of him. I guess, Andrew, the better question is, let's say Jimmy G does start and Trey Lance is out of the picture. Where are you kind of looking to go then? Because we do have our guy Jaylen Hurts sitting at 6,600, but there are some additional dual threat guys like your Justin Fields, like your Taysom Hills, if you want to save a little more money.
Yeah, I think that you just go, you go to the next mobile quarterback on the board.
We got a lot of them this week. It's nice.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys you can choose from. I guess I would probably go, depending on how much salary I have, I think that I prefer to go to Hurts. I like his matchup more against the football team. Again, just they've looked like they've packed it in. It looked like they had, kind of resurged a little bit after a really tough start to the season, but now it's like they've kind of regressed back to, what they were doing during the start of the year where they really weren't stopping anybody. I mean, second most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. We saw Hurts just 2 weeks ago, have a monster game against them, despite starting off really, really poorly. He was able to rally and get things going. So I think the football team has packed it in. So I would like to get up to Hurts at 6,600. If not, Taysom Hill just playing in a really gross game, against Sam Darnold. It's just gross, but Hill has been a top 12 quarterback in almost all of his starts dating back to last year. Last week his last game he played against Tampa Bay, was one of those weird games where they won 9-0. He wasn't really asked to do a lot. Both offenses didn't really do much. So that's the floor you're looking at. But I mean, that was really his, outrange kind of outcome where it was just a very bad performance from him in fantasy. But I don't think that it'll be that bad this week.
Yeah, we got Fields there at 5,500, but coming off the ankle injury, I think there's a lot of questions surrounding if he's going to really be, willing to run as much as we kind of saw in that nice QB1 stretch he had himself 4 of his last 5 starts. I would lean Hurts over Taysom. It is $600 in saving, but with Hurts last week, he only had 7 rushing yards and he still finished as the QB 13. I don't think Taysom Hill is capable of doing that. Your boy Deontay Harris might be back in action. We'll see if he can get off the COVID list. I'm sorry, Deontay Hardy. Deontay Hardy. New last name.
Get his name right. I went down the whole rabbit hole of trying to figure out what happened to his name. I was scrolling because it's on his TikTok that, he has this video, and apparently what happened was somebody stole his social security number based on the document that was in the TikTok video. Somebody dove in and was able to take it. And I was like, dude, what are people doing on TikTok? This guy's going through this sentimental moment with his stepfather. He's changing his last name. And then you have some jerk on TikTok literally stealing his social security number because you can kind of see it if you zoom in times 1,000 on the document. So wild stuff out there. Hopefully we get Deontay Hardy back on the field for the Saints.
Be careful in those TikTok streets, Andrew. There's a lot of bad people out there. All right, moving on to running back. I think there's a lot of cash game viable guys because, the pool from 4.9K at the low end, which is Boston Scott, if Jordan Howard's also going to join Miles Sanders on the sideline, even if he does, I would not want Boston Scott in cash if Howard doesn't. I think there's enough guys, priced just $1,000 more to not worry about it. But if Howard's out, Boston Scott is cash game viable. And then you can get all the way up to a guy that I do think needs to be locked in Ronald Jones at the Jets. So a lot of potential options here. Andrew, I'm leaning towards Rojo, 6,300 against the Jets. League worst defense in fantasy points per game. Allowed the running backs, as we saw last week, in the absence of Godwin and Evans, much more run-first attack from this Tampa Bay offense than we've seen, even if Mike Evans comes back. They're facing the freaking Jets, double-digit favorite. I do just think Rojo needs to be jammed in the lineups, cash lineups of all shapes and sizes. And also, if he's active, Elijah Mitchell at 6K. Look, I'm fine stacking him with Trey Lance. If we can guarantee like almost every single touchdown on the ground in this offense against the freaking Texans, I'm not against that. We know Mitchell has true 30 touch upside when he's out there. And, if we can just have Lance and Mitchell there, this is a rare situation where there's enough concentrated volume between these two that I'm not against lining that up. But if that's not your pick, so many other options. Devin Singletary, 5,400 at home versus the Falcons. We can talk ourselves into Sony Michel, Darrell Williams, Jeff Wilson if Mitchell is out, Chase Edmonds if Connor is out. Andrew, we have so many cash game viable running backs this week. Which ones do you like the best?
Yeah, I think that, at the top of that tier of the mid-range, David Montgomery, he's just seeing just crazy usage. And I just love that he's seeing dual usage as a receiver. He had 9 targets last week, and that's why I was talking about him a lot. 7 catches for 61 yards. He's checking off all the boxes of what you're looking for. 4th in expected fantasy points per game. 3rd in touches since week 11. He's facing the Giants. The Bears are favored by a touchdown in this game. That doesn't happen very often. So this could be a game where the Bears can establish the run with David Montgomery like they want to do every single week, and they just can't because they're usually losing a lot of their games. It makes a lot of sense for him. Now, it's almost like you'd rather have him actually catching double off passes than getting carries because it's just better for the PPR scoring. But I think Montgomery is really, really safe. I think in the projections, he is the highest projected running back in terms of rostership. And that, I think that's a kind of a useful tool to lean on in terms of cash because you don't necessarily need to beat the field. So if you're really torn between 2 running backs, well, if everyone's going to play, David Montgomery, then you probably should play him 2 in cash because if he has a 30-point game and you just chose the other 6K running back, then you're going to get buried, and that kind of defeats the purpose of the cash game. You're only trying to win on a couple different players. You're trying to make others make mistakes against you. So I think Montgomery makes a ton of sense here. I know you mentioned Michelle. I like Singletary
Andrew,
a lot.
Real quick. You sold me on Montgomery being a top option, so good job by you. I would bump out Elijah Mitchell. It's not the worst thing in the world to have. I think Lance and Mitchell can work together, but why even mess with it? We can get up to David Montgomery. I think with some of the value we can get at tight end and defense. More on that later. So Rojo and Montgomery, I think those are the top 2, but now continue.
Yeah, no, it's interesting with Rojo too, because I was surprised at how I thought his rostership was going to be extremely high. And I think that it's, as we'll get into when we talk about receivers, I think it's Antonio Brown is suffocating Ronald Jones roster because people just can't play. People are choosing to play Antonio Brown instead of Ronald Jones, which I think is kind of an interesting nugget. But I think, Michelle, he's the bell cow for the Rams. Locked and loaded matchup isn't amazing, but he's getting a ton of volume. So I think that he's really, really safe. And Darrell Williams makes a ton of sense. Maybe more of a tournament pivot if Edwards-Helaire is ultimately ruled out because he's at the same price as Sony Michel.
It feels like CEH isn't going to play. We'll see what goes on with that.
And they always do this, and especially go back to your thing about Kyle Shanahan. It's John Harbaugh did this with Lamar Jackson. Maybe he'll play. It's it's just so that the other team has to prepare for both quarterbacks.
For weeks, he's been saying this. Come on.
So man. I think that. Imagine the tilt. Oh my God! Sundays. We get the report at 2:30. Jimmy Garoppolo's in the game. Everyone has these Trey Lance lineups that are all just dead now. We have to figure out who to late swap to.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. Please, for the love of God, do not give me that Jimmy G game time decision label. That would suck. All right, so we're leading Rojo and Montgomery as the top 2 cash game plays at running back. I think Devin Singletary is also more than viable. Elijah Mitchell, if active. And then once again, Sony Michel, Chase Edmonds if James Conner is out. If Conner is out, then I actually would prioritize getting Chase Edmonds in there above these other guys. And then Boston Scott 4.9K. If that one feels just like a little trappy, man, I'm not positive that I think Scott, deserves to be one of the better waiver additions and stuff. But even then, it's not like we're ranking him as this top 10, top 12 running back in season long, much more of like a borderline RB2. All those freaking problems that have been impacting Miles Sanders this year, like also can apply to Boston Scott. This isn't like a dream situation.
Yeah, he's also not playing the Giants because who always scores touchdowns against.
He's a Giant slayer, man.
Like even when he's like not even the starter, he just somehow finagles his way into the starting lineup whenever they face the Giants and scores a touchdown. So
I love that. It's like just Boston Scott owns the Giants. Such a random storyline that continues to come in year after year after year. So a lot of options at running back where you don't have to pay a lot. And Andrew, that allows us at wide receiver to get up to our guy Cooper Kupp right now in this season, averaging the second most PPR points per game among any wide receiver in the last 50 years. Only Jerry Rice in 1987 was putting up more numbers than Kupp. Oh, and by the way, he's facing the same freaking Ravens secondary that we just saw Burrow, Boyd, Higgins, and Chase go absolutely apeshit against last week. So yes, I am down to pay up for Kupp over Jonathan Taylor. I mean, it is an extra $500, but hey man, we saw last week with Taylor. The dude is mortal, particularly when or if Wentz is not going to be under there, you would expect the Raiders to be able to step up, and really do a better job than I guess we would expect against them. I understand the Raiders are like not a good run defense, but at the same time, man, like last week against Denver. What the fuck am I looking at? Yeah. All right. I know the Raiders are not a great run defense, but man, when you actually have to go into things and you look at, okay, if they don't have to respect the pass at all, I could see Jonathan Taylor maybe not having his usual, berserk day, but those could also be famous last words. Either way, I do prioritize Kupp over Taylor, and I think it's fair to give Kupp the higher overall projection. I don't think that's exactly a hot take. After that, Andrew, you mentioned it before, Antonio Brown, 6,100. What are we doing here, DraftKings? Like you just, to put him underneath Terry McLaurin, Devontae Smith, Hunter Renfrow, and some of these guys, it's like, what the hell were they smoking when they were making these prices? Because I want some, but man, like even if Mike Evans comes back, okay, great. We're still looking at 10 plus targets, and who the hell knows how healthy Mike Evans will even be coming off the COVID list, coming off the hamstring injury. So AB, lock him in regardless. And to your point, Andrew, like, yeah, just eat the chalk. There's not a bad enough reason to fade AB in this potential smash spot. And then after that, I do lean Amon-Ra St. Brown at 6K. He's basically discount Jaylen Waddle. They're both in solid matchups. I'd argue St. Brown's is even better because when you look at the Seattle Seahawks defense, I mean, they've actually been one of the better secondaries in the league at stopping passes thrown at least 20 yards downfield because they put all their eggs in that basket, which isn't the worst strategy. They're just trying to limit big plays. But because of that, we see slot receivers have the third most catches against them in the league. And running backs, they're so bad against running backs, not necessarily because their run defense is brutal. It's because they give up so many receptions and yards to them because they just allow these dink and dunks all over the field. So maybe getting DeAndre Swift back cuts into St. Brown's workload a little bit. Even then, man, I'd be shocked if he finishes with fewer than 8 targets. So if you can get up to Waddle instead of St. Brown, that's great, but I don't really think it's absolutely necessary. So, I'm leaning towards those guys, Andrew. How do you kind of feel about that group? Because again, we could even go cheaper depending on some of these injuries, get someone like Josh Palmer in there.
Yeah, no, like those are the exact same 3 guys I sent you, Antonio Brown, Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are the guys that kind of fit into the build that I made. And yeah, Josh Palmer, I think, is the only one that, under 4K, I couldn't find, when I do the breakdown, I try to kind of tier everything all right, below 4K, who are the receivers that are in play? Guys that, I'm not just picking a random player to just put in my line because I don't know what's going to happen. Someone that I could actually envision, okay, here's his path to success. That's not I'm talking on crazy pills. And there was only 3 guys that really fit the category, Zay Jones, Braxton Berrios, and then Josh Palmer. And Josh Palmer is clearly the best option of those 3 guys. And then that's only the caveat with him is if Mike Williams doesn't come back. So I think it's interesting that Jalen Guyton has already returned to the team at this time of recording. We don't have any updates on Mike Williams. So Palmer, I think, does make it possible. So if you get him into your lineup in replacement of like Amon-Ra St. Brown, then you can actually play Cooper Kupp and Jonathan Taylor in the same lineup if you so choose. So that's kind of like one path you could take. If you use Josh Palmer, you get Trey Lance. Just because you can save a lot, you punt tight end, you punt DST, you can fit in both those 9K studs, because honestly, like, they're worth it because they're just so far ahead of the rest of the field in respective to what the other positions score. So I think that's just another kind of thing to keep in note, that if we have that, accessibility, something that you can do.
You think we should be trying to prioritize that regardless? I mean, Braxton Berrios, 3,700 is reasonable enough. I know last week he got there with the kick return touchdown, but like even before he had the full-time role that he now has with Crowder out, I don't think Crowder's coming back. So
he's like 50-50 to come back. And then Elijah Moore is like also like 50-50 to come back too.
We got Elijah. Okay, no. Damn.
So no Braxton Berrios, I guess.
No Braxton Berrios in cash. Okay. It was a fun 10 seconds in my brain considering that. So, okay. Right now, prioritizing Cooper Kupp, Antonio Brown, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But yes, keep an eye on Mike Williams. He is eligible to return, as is everyone that's had COVID, basically, with these new rules they got going on. Just realize when they're healthy, it's usually Keenan Allen full-time, Mike Williams full-time, Guyton and Palmer legit split reps, like right down the middle. I think with Mike being, I believe he's unvaccinated. That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. I believe with Mike, we've seen numerous examples over the past few weeks, these guys, coming back, not having the same sort of conditioning. I would not be trusting Mike Williams coming back. I just think that it'd probably be this kind of 3-player rotation more than usual, Guyton, Palmer, Williams, and predicting which one's going to go off against a good Broncos secondary. It's just, something that we're not going to mess around with in cash. All right, Andrew, real quick on defense. We're saving money with Detroit, right? There's not like a great kind of cheap defense this week. But if you look at the offenses, like we got the Jets going up against the Buccaneers. Hell no. Falcons against the Bills. Absolutely not. Jaguars against the Patriots. Miss me with that. Washington against Philly. No. Baltimore against the Rams. No. Like we're going up and up and up, and it's brutal. The one spot we can maybe salvage is not a good Detroit defense, but one that hasn't quit against the Seattle offense. And we talk about this, man. Guys like Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, when they hold the ball this long, they make some big plays. They also take a lot of sacks, which is ultimately what we're looking for here.
Yeah, I mean, you're not afraid of the Seahawks offense. If you were afraid of the Seahawks offense, we'd be talking about Russ Wilson stacks left and right, which we have which is literally never worked all year.
Haven't even mentioned them yet. Yeah.
It hasn't worked all year. And so, yeah, I think that the lines make a ton of sense as like a pay down. If you want to pay up a little bit, I don't always hate the strategy of going for a good real life defense that's just that's priced really, really cheap against a good offense. We've seen the Chargers stumble at times. So I don't think the Broncos at 2,600 is some crazy play. I mean, the Broncos are a legit good defense. You look at all the good offenses they've played, they've stifled every single one of those offenses. The Chiefs, the Cowboys, they have been able to slow down those high powered offenses. And we saw last week, the Chargers are not, impenetrable. They can struggle in certain matchups if things don't go their way. So I think Broncos at 2,600, maybe a little bit more upside, just because Detroit you're playing, you're just hope they don't get negative points, because they usually just, and the thing that sucks, they don't have pass rush. So even though Russ gets sacked a lot, I'm trying to find a reason, Lions are 31st in pressure rate. Dang, this is really not an upside play, I think. But in cash, yeah, I think the Lions are definitely the pay down option.
If you want to go up just a little bit higher, I think the Dolphins also make some level of sense. Not really in cash, probably, but tournaments.
Do you like the Dolphins more or the Giants more? They're both at the same price.
Probably the Dolphins, because the Dolphins, man, the highest
they're good in real life.
They're good in real life, highest blitz rate in the league, and Tannehill, we've seen him when he gets pressured, man. Tannehill's another guy where if he has these 4 or 5 sack games where those points get racked up in a hurry. So, yeah, I do like Miami defense there, and this all leads us to paying down at tight end. I know you were heartbroken, Andrew, when Tyler Kroft got put on the COVID list and we couldn't get all the way down to him. But our savior, Alie-Cox, might just be there for us. Just 2,800. We need to keep an eye on Jack Doyle. If Doyle's out, though, it's all wheels up for Alie-Cox, because Doyle got injured early in that game last week. And accordingly, we saw Alie-Cox 90% of the offensive snaps. So they're going to continue to keep Kylan Grayson somewhat involved. But seeing that 90% number, it's pretty clear that, Alie-Cox is going to be an every down tight end, and they might do some 2 tight end stuff otherwise. So if Doyle is out, I am 100% putting in Alie-Cox, Andrew. I know you are too. Where are you looking, though, if Doyle is able to play through the ping?
Man, please, Doyle, do not do this to us when we
just take it easy, man. You got a lot of important games ahead of you. Just rest up. Give Alie-Cox this one.
I guess the only other guy that I was looking at, I think that Komet is like someone we talk about in cash. It seems like, he's always kind of a cash game play because he doesn't catch touchdowns. And the thing that matchup this week could not be better for him to finally find the end zone because the Giants rank dead last in red zone targets to tight ends. So if you hear me say that and you're like, all right, well, Andrew, then I should just play Jimmy Graham, then go ahead. Like that's honestly probably going to happen, but maybe Komet finds the end zone as well. The Giants are just giving up a lot of points to tight ends in general. So I think that he just has a consistent target share. He's a consistent role. So up at 3,300, I believe he's at. So he's someone that if you can't get to Doyle, or excuse me, if we don't get Mo Alie-Cox, I think Komet makes sense from a cash format. And if you just somehow need to save more money, John Bates for the Washington football team. So he's been running more routes than Ricky Seals-Jones has, which is something. No, dude, John Bates.
You don't want John Bates.
The Eagles' worst team against tight ends.
I don't care.
He's running ahead of Ricky Seals-Jones. That's all I have to say. He's 2,900.
Not by that much.
But it's enough. I just chase the routes run. That's my process.
I go up to Uzoma, man, or Komet at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean, I prefer Komet.
Jimmy G and Jack Doyle take the week off, and these arguments don't even exist. So fair enough if you're truly looking to punt, but at that point, man, like I just don't punt the position. Then if we need to rearrange things, that's fine, but I don't want John freaking Bates on the squad. All right, just to kind of rehash some of this, Trey Lance definitely the number one cash game quarterback of the week. But if Jimmy G is going to be out there, we are looking to do our usual business and get on up to Jaylen Hurts, still too cheap at just 6,600. Running back, a lot of viable options. Ronald Jones and Dave Montgomery are two favorites. Don't sleep on Devin Singletary, though. Elijah Mitchell, if active. Sony Michel, Darrell Williams, Chase Edmonds, if Connor's out, will be prioritized. And Boston Scott, if Jordan Howard is out. You can get up to Jonathan Taylor, as Andrew brought up, with Cooper Kupp. Basically, what you got to do is you pivot off of either Rojo or Montgomery. You get up to Taylor, and then you're able to go down at wide receiver to Josh Palmer at 3,600. That is contingent, though, on Mike Williams being out. So Cooper Kupp, Antonio Brown, lock them in the wide receiver spots. Again, pray the fantasy guys that Jack Doyle takes this week off, and we can get Mo Alie-Cox at 5,800, and then likely paying down at defense with Detroit at 2,400. Pretty straightforward week for cash, I think. So hopefully, hopefully not too much changes in the immediate aftermath after we record this. But as always, we'll be back on Friday with the injury edition of this podcast where, throughout as we're going through that, we will, make some edits to what we're talking about here today and update that. So Andrew, moving on along to some GPP stuff now. We are trying to win $1 million, beat over 100,000 people. We got to get a little bit contrarian, not trying to be morons here, but we do need to think a little bit out of the box. So with that in mind, one of the easy strategies that I think we can see a lot of times is just pivoting off some of the chalky running backs and going into the passing game. So if you want to look at, Brady, I think that can make a level of sense. Josh Allen, these receivers, we know they always have a chance to boom. But I think the two kind of matchups I'm really leaning on, Justin Herbert with Keenan and like Palmer or even Eckler coming off a dud. I know Denver's tough, but let's face it, Herbert, he's capable of putting up 303 tutties against just about anyone. He did clear 300 against his defense last time they faced. Wasn't pretty. They only scored 13 points. But again, I just think Herbert, he's a good enough quarterback where when he's on, he can take down pretty much any defense. And then, as I alluded to in the intro of this podcast, we also have Matthew Stafford and company going up against the Ravens. Like, okay, I get it. Cooper Kupp, I mean, man, if there ever was chalk to eat, I think it's him. Like, you don't need to fade this dude in tournaments by any stretch of the imagination. So Stafford, Kupp, and then throw OBJ and Jefferson out there, man. One of those dudes will probably catch a touchdown. I would probably put my money on OBJ, but I think Van's perfectly viable as well. And looking at their rostership right now, man, both guys are awfully low. We know this Ravens secondary cannot cover anyone. They're getting Jimmy Smith and Chris Westry back, but even then, man, without Humphreys and Peters, I just think it's an uphill battle. So those are kind of the top two stacks I'm looking at in terms of QB and pass catchers. Andrew, I know you're with me on Stafford. What about the highest projected scoring game of the week, though, Cardinals-Cowboys?
Yeah, I think that people are picking a side with Kyler Murray instead of Dak Prescott. And I don't know if I get that. I mean, I think that we're seeing two teams going in opposite directions. Like, we're seeing the Cowboys kind of surge right now. Their defense is on fire, stopping everybody. Their offense is starting to click a little bit more. We saw Dak basically just like light up the football team in one half of football. Basically did everything possible in just one half. So I lean on the side of the Cowboys. That's who I want to kind of roster in this game. It's really easy to identify who you want to stack or double stack Dak with. I just think it's a really good spot for a Cardinals defense that really has not looked the same in recent weeks. I believe they were in the top 5 in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to quarterbacks in their last 4 games. So yeah, you have CeeDee Lamb, you have Amari Cooper, you know who you can double stack Dak Prescott with. And I just think that's a really good spot for him in a game that there should be a lot of points in. And I just think that we're going to see more points from the Cowboys side. And Kyler can do enough on his end to keep it competitive. Like, that's what you're always kind of looking for. It's like, okay, if Dak's going to get there, Dak needs to get pushed. Like, they need to push him a little bit. I know they didn't really have that. That didn't really play out last week, but for the most part, this season, in more competitive games, that's when we've seen Dak hit some of his ceiling outcomes. So I think that he's the quarterback I want to roster from Cardinals and Cowboys.
Moving on to some of these running backs. I think one of my favorite turning plays at running back is going to be Rashaad Penny against the Lions. I'm not sure why the projected ownership isn't higher, man. I understand we got Rojo and Montgomery there. You can also go down, I guess, to Sony Michel and company. But like, if people are really going to trust DeAndre Swift coming off this injury against Seattle, man, could not be me. Like, give me Penny in this one. I understand Seattle hasn't looked good, but Swift, we've like mocked him as the Jalen Hurts of running backs all year. I think people kind of have this twisted like image in their mind about like what Swift was. He got almost all of his value from catching passes in garbage time. And I think if they get down a lot and he's playing through the pain of his shoulder injury, they could easily just pull him and let Godwin or Jamal or Reynolds just catch those dumb passes in the fourth quarter of the game. Not a guarantee Goff's out there. Like, yeah, it's cool that Tim Boyle showed he's maybe not the worst quarterback alive for a week, but we can't just ignore the week where he did look like the worst quarterback alive, man. This is still a Detroit Lions offense that the only consistency has been Amon-Ra St. Brown over the last 4 weeks. But hell, man, we saw him goose egg on his birthday after he had a nice little stretch going earlier in the year. So with just so much unknown, this Detroit offense, and I get it, Seattle offense hasn't been a model of consistency either, but over these past 4 weeks, man, Rashaad Penny really has taken over as the lead back. Alex Collins was back in the picture last week. He was healthy. He didn't play. Adrian Peterson, he's on IR. So we have Rashaad Penny expecting to see 20 plus carries against the Detroit Lions. He's a home touchdown favorite. Give me all the Rashaad Penny. Don't be afraid to stack him with that Seattle defense as well. Also a fan. Even if Stevenson is out there, man, let's take a long look at Damien Harris, because Stevenson coming off the COVID list, I think it makes sense. Like a lot of guys we've seen, if he is somewhat eased back into action. And if not, we have, again, a massive home favorite. We know the Patriots want to run the ball as much as possible. And Damien Harris is coming off 3 touchdowns. I'm not saying he's going to get that again. I understand he's not catching our passes. But if there was a running back in the entire 6K range that you had to gamble is going to score like multiple touchdowns, maybe you take Ronald Jones first, which that makes sense. He's almost at 20% projected ownership. But after him, I think you probably have to land on Damien Harris with or without Stevenson. Like, I don't think he's just because Stevenson's back. It's not like Harris is going to see 8 or 10 carries now. He can still push for 20 plus, man. So I think Damien Harris makes a lot of sense. I think Rashaad Penny makes sense. But if you want to just kind of look at an overall strategy, look at all the guys we've been talking about with cash. Again, it's all kind of that 4.9 to 6.5K range. So going up to guys like Zeke, Mixon, Kamara, Eckler, Taylor's always going to kind of carry a certain level of ownership, but this week it even seems a little bit reduced. So if you really just want to kind of change up your overall lineup construction, I think the easiest kind of cash game model this week is paying down at running back, paying up at wide receiver. So do the opposite in tournaments. So Andrew, if you want to compliment me on some of the things I just said, I always appreciate that. But, looking at some of your choices, I think the one that sticks out is someone where, again, need to monitor the injury report. But based on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, again, being sidelined, Darrell Williams, man, he's someone that I think is cash game viable. But if he's not going to carry ownership, yeah, let's lock him in everywhere.
Darrell Williams. Yeah, man, that's the play here. And I think it's just important to, when you're looking at tournament running backs, what happens if Darrell Williams is right? If he scores 2 rushing touchdowns, what does that mean? Oh, well, it probably means Patrick Mahomes didn't throw for 3 touchdowns. Like, you really got to find these leverage spots. And really the easiest way I think that you hit on it was, who's the highest projected quarterback? Play the running back in that game, and then vice versa. So who's the highest projected running back? You play the quarterback in tournaments. So that's the way you can kind of spin things. So we have Sony Michel as the most popular running back, or he's up there in the top 3. So how do you pivot off him? Okay, you play Matthew Stafford, who we talked about at quarterback, and then you play Darrell Williams at the same price point at the running back slot. So I think the matchup is really good for him in this specific spot. You look at the Bengals, ranked bottom 5 in targets, receptions, and yards allowed running backs this season. And that's Darrell Williams' role in this offense, even with Edwards-Helaire healthy. Like, he's been the preferred pass catching back all season. He's ranked 12th in routes run per dropback rate at 45%. And that rate went up to 56%, which is basically a top 5 usage rate when Edwards-Helaire had missed time earlier in the season during that 6-game stretch. So, I mean, Darrell Williams, you're looking at a 3-down workhorse back. And I don't understand, like, every single time, Derek Gore, like, has a game in garbage time, he just gets, like, so much steam. And, like, everything, guys, like, it's always in garbage time. In that one drive he had on, like, Monday Night Football, and he didn't play in, like, the second half at all. For some reason, like, it gets so fixated that, like, he's, like, in play now. It's like, no, like, he's really never been a factor unless they're blowing a team out, or there was just that one particular drive where he just got, he was just in the game. So I think Darrell Williams is pretty clear that he's the clear cut, workhorse there for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think that I'm going to want to play him against, we're all going to be after, I already know the Mahomes, Burrow, people want to attack this passing game all over again. It's like, so you just look at the running backs, like you mentioned, paying up for Mixon. Mixon is averaging 24 touches per game over his last 6. That's the most in the NFL. He has just as many touches as Jonathan Taylor does. Like, those guys have 30-point fantasy ceilings because they touch the ball so many times. So, that's part of the reason why you usually want to pay down at running back, because you can find guys like David Montgomery that can get into that 24 touch range, but the consistency that Mixon sees it every single week isn't always guaranteed with some of these other cheaper running backs. So Mixon and Darrell Williams I want to play the running backs in this Chiefs-Bengals game.
And Darrell, unlike Clyde, I mean, when you play Clyde, like, you got to do what you're saying. You're like, you just expect Mahomes and company to bust. Darrell can get there potentially alongside Mahomes. I mean, the last time he was a starter was when he was mossing Raiders in the end zone. He had 9 catches, 101 yards, and a score. Like, I know they don't throw the ball to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but man, like, they do to Darrell for whatever reason. You drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be this great receiving back, and they throw the ball at Darrell instead. In his 5 starts without Clyde, he caught 3, 6, 3, and 9 catches. And Clyde doesn't have more than 3 catches in the game. You have to go all the way back to 2020 to find the last time he did. Now, at wide receiver, mentioned Jaylen Waddle before. On a full PPR site like DraftKings, Andrew, like, we kind of I've talked about, like, these slot receivers, and I Hope mentioned Isaiah McKenzie last week as kind of this potential type too, where we need to look at upside not as necessarily like, oh, I need the Tyler Lockett's of the world where they can give me 4 catches for 150 yards and a touchdown. Give me 10 catches for 150 yards and a touchdown, man. Give me all those catches, and they give you such a higher floor with it. So Waddle, man, other than Amon-Ra St. Brown, I just don't see another receiver getting schemed these sort of just high floor reception totals in the league right now. So against the Titans, they've actually allowed the most explosive plays to wide receivers aligned out of the slot this year. Maybe, just maybe, we get Waddle's usual floor with a couple big plays thrown in there as well. Mentioned before, Braxton Berrios at 3.7K. If Crowder's out in tournaments now, not in cash, I do think Berrios is more than viable. We have continued to see this offense love to throw the ball to the slot. Yeah, maybe Elijah Moore is back in the picture, but this is also a situation where, like Elijah Moore, it took him like halfway through the year to get a starting role. Regardless, wouldn't be shocked if he comes back, isn't immediately featured in the offense. And then we talked about Josh Palmer a little bit before, but yeah, I think my favorite stack in tournaments is mostly going to be going with Matthew Stafford, Beckham, and Jefferson and Kupp against that Ravens defense. Plenty of other options, though. Andrew, I know you're with me on Waddle. What about our other guy? I know he's facing shadow coverage from Xavier Howard, but man, if you give A.J. Brown 10 plus targets against just about anyone, I'm probably going to be betting my money on AJB.
Yeah, I think that you want to skinny stack this game between the Dolphins and Titans. Something that kind of stood out to me about this particular matchup was the pace of play. Like, both these teams run extremely fast, and that's something that we talked about last week with the Bengals and Ravens. And that game ended up being a massive shootout and being one that you wanted to stack. Now, the quarterbacks are definitely more in the fringe. So if I had to play one quarterback, I probably would lean towards Tua, just because I can, you can stack him with Waddle, you can stack him with Devontae Parker, who's just coming off, an abysmal performance where he just got blanked, even though he's been really consistent for the most of the year. If you don't want a full game stack, and I think it's just so clear, Waddle's getting all the targets for Miami, and AJ Brown is getting all the targets for the Titans. Like it's so clear. Both these defenses are pass funnels. Like both are really strong against the run, not as great against the pass. They're forcing teams to throw on them, and now the Titans actually have someone to throw the ball to. Like that was the biggest thing with Tannehill. He had no one to throw the ball to. AJ Brown comes back. 50% target share in his first game back, 11-16 for 145 receiving yards and a touchdown. Early Christmas gift. Could not have been happier last Thursday night with AJ Brown's performance. So yeah, I want to roll it back. His roster projection's not like super low. Like he's not flying under the radar, but he's still not going to be as highly as popular as Cooper Kupp or some of these other guys. And I just think that at receiver, you need to hit on a guy that's going to hit like 30 points. And I just see very clearly AJ Brown getting there. Yeah, I know the Dolphins have good corners, but AJ Brown is better than those guys. Sorry. Like I'm going to bet that he's going to be the better player in those matchups. I know he's getting the ball. So I think AJ Brown is someone that I really want to play, especially in stacks alongside Jaylen Waddle. Other guys, I know you mentioned some of these slot receivers, Hunter Renfrow. Look, he's been not great over the last 2 weeks, but before then we saw him have 3 straight games with over 100 yards receiving when Darren Waller wasn't playing. And we know Darren Waller's he's on IR now. So we know he's not going to be back. You look at the way the Colts defense plays zone. Renfrow ranks third in the NFL in receptions against zone coverage this year. So he's going to get peppered with targets. We don't know what Bryan Edwards, the status of him is. So I think Renfrow makes a lot of sense, especially as like a bring back option for Jonathan Taylor. Like if Jonathan Taylor, if you're going to play him in a tournament, like you want there to be something on the other side. Like the Raiders can do something. Their offense is mediocre enough where they at least get some type of production from at least one player, whether it is Renfrow, whether it is Foster Moreau. Like there's definitely a way to add another component to a Jonathan Taylor lineup. So I think that Renfrow is probably the guy I would look at 6,600. Again, he's like in a weird price range where people just aren't going to play him, even though like the guy has 20-point upside, like you mentioned, because he gets 10 targets a game. Like he's heavily targeted. So I think Renfrow makes a ton of sense there as a bring back option in Jonathan Taylor lineups. Odell Beckham Jr. we mentioned him and Van Jefferson. I don't get why they're so flying under the radar. I mean, both had over 100 air yards last week. I mean, Matthew Stafford just sucked last week. Like, he was just so bad. He was just missing guys left and right, just terrible performance. But what I noticed about Stafford when I was looking at his game logs, basically whenever he's had a game where he's finished outside the top 19 quarterbacks on the week, he's finished the next week he's never finished worse as top 5 the next week. So he's been able to bounce back after bad games. And I think that he's out to prove something because they were able to win that game against the Vikings despite him playing so terribly. And I think that he knows, okay, this Ravens defense is reeling right now. I want to just, I'm going to put it to him. I'm going to get all these guys involved. So I think this could be a game where you definitely want to stack the Rams offense. And then the last guy I'll mention here is Rashaad Penny, just as a differentiator with the Tampa Bay passing attack. Now, the way that the Buccaneers receivers shook out last week, Tyler Johnson basically was a non-factor despite running routes. Cyril Grayson was playing ahead of him. So I would assume that because Perryman was out, we saw Grayson kind of fill into the Mike Evans role. I would assume with Rashaad Perryman now back off the COVID list, he would kind of take over that Mike Evans spot and be out there on, running around on 90% plus of Tom Brady's dropback. So again, Antonio Brown is the chalk of the chalk, but if Perryman's the one that comes down with the touchdowns, that's how you get different with a Tom Brady lineup. So whether you do Tom Brady, Gronk, and Perryman, something like that in a large field GPP. Like Antonio Brown was good last week, but he didn't score. So if you didn't play him, again, 4,900 was really tough to get away from him. At 6,100, if he just does what he did last week, there are ways to not play him potentially in a tournament and not necessarily get buried. Yeah. So I think that that's an interesting pivot. And actually, I do want to mention one other guy, Lockett, against the Detroit Lions. Like, 5th highest passer rating allowed to slot receivers. For some reason, DK Metcalf has higher projected rostership because he's big and fast, even though Tyler Lockett has outproduced him, I feel like, in almost all the games this season. So Tyler Lockett, always a guy that can explode. And he's playing the Lions. So someone's going to have to score from Seattle. So whether it's Penny, like you alluded to, Tyler Lockett, I mean, the market thinks it's going to be DK Metcalf, which probably means it won't be because we're seemingly never right. It's basically, we talk about this Jared Evans. Basically, whoever gets the first target from the Seahawks receivers is always the one that goes off. So you immediately know, once the game starts, oh, baby, it's a Lockett game. Or, oh, no, it's a Metcalf game. So I'll be waiting with bated breath to see who gets the first target for the Seahawks.
Maybe, just maybe, a little play action bootleg. Oh, it's a dump down to Gerald Everett, sitting there at just 4.1K. What a transition right there to the tight end group. I do think Everett, right there makes a lot of sense. If you want to go, we talked about a bring back for the Jonathan Taylor lineup, so I don't think Foster Moreau is out of the question. But, going up just from the bottom to top at tight end, Everett is the first one that I'm actually both feeling good about from his potential production standpoint, and I think the price is reasonable enough. So I get it, Komet, Alie-Cox, and those guys, they have past success, but Everett has demonstrated that for the better part of the last, 4-6 weeks. He's overcome the whole, infamous week 13 game. That was one of the worst performances by a skill position player all year, doing much better, and does have that matchup against the Lions. You were talking earlier about, finding ways to get off of Antonio Brown and, leveraging that. Rob Gronkowski. I know it's been back-to-back duds, but man, we know that other than Mark Andrews, probably has higher 2-touchdown upside than just about anyone. And how about Mark Andrews? All the way up there at 7,400. I know it's a lot of money, but it's not like he's necessarily overpriced. If you just look at wide receivers and tight ends this year and their PPR fantasy points per game, number one's Cooper Kupp, then Devontae Adams, then Debo, then Justin Jefferson, then Antonio Brown, then Tyreek Hill, and then tied with Deontay Johnson at 7th is Mark freaking Andrews. So more PPR points per game than Godwin, than Diggs, than Chase, than Allen. All these guys that if you saw a 7,400 price tag, you're like, okay, that's not cheap, but it's not something out of the ordinary for a legit alpha number one receiver. That's what Mark Andrews is. We just happen to call him a tight end. So I think he's a great option specifically for those Rams, Stafford, Kupp, OBJ, bring back stacks. So paying up at the position, I think could make a lot of sense this week. And, we're probably never going to see George Kittle have a lower ownership, especially if Trey Lance is under center. Makes sense to be an easy enough stacking partner. I get it. Lance, pretty erratic as a passer. I think he can maybe exist in those, 1.5 seconds between getting the snap though and throwing the ball to 5 yards downfield with George Kittle before he does king shit and just breaks a million tackles. So once again, facing the Texans, don't be sleeping on George Kittle's potential to supply one of these slate breaking games that, he hasn't had for a couple of weeks, but man, oh man, I think he could get there. So Kittle is probably my favorite one of the week to try to get up to, just because we know what he can do when everything goes right for him. But I think specifically with those Ram stacks, trying to find a way to get up to Mark Andrews makes some sense as well. All these guys, man, that list I just mentioned, Kittle is at 16th. Kittle has averaged as many PPR points per game as Mike Evans this year, more than CeeDee Lamb, more than Adam Thielen, more than Renfro, Marquise Brown, all these guys. So I know they're tight ends, but they really have been producing like wide receivers more weeks than not. I am worried about Travis Kelce, though. All these guys coming back from the COVID list, man. I just don't know if there's enough difference in our projections between Andrews and Kittle versus Kelce when we just saw last week. They are willing to bring back. They brought back Tyreek Hill knowing that he wasn't going to be able to play a full game's worth of snaps. That's problematic in trusting Kelce here, especially for that price tag. So, similar to just what we were talking about at running back, trying to go against the grain generally compared to normal roster construction. I think because they've jacked up these prices at the top tier of tight end, hey, it might be worth trying to go get it. And don't be afraid to do a double stack as long as you're including Andrews, Kelce, Kittle, or Gronk, because those guys truly do have the same sort of upside as wide receivers, running backs that you'd normally be putting there in the flex. Everett, Andrew, I think we're both in agreement that he's a solid guy. But hey, what about Kyler Murray's new number one receiver, who, hey, he's a tight end, but he does lead the way in targets since losing DeAndre Hopkins. Talk to me about Zach Ertz.
Yes, Zach Ertz. He's actually second in expected fantasy points per game behind only Mark Andrews over the last 6 weeks. So again, like you said earlier, he is the target share leader, 28% target share over the last 2 weeks. AJ Green has returned to his dust form that we saw last year with the Cincinnati Bengals, along with Emmanuel Sanders and all these other veterans that we were just like, don't draft these guys. And we were ultimately proven correct because those guys are no longer relevant and they're being replaced by other players on their offenses. But I think it makes so much sense. I think that what I'm trying to do more of with tight ends in tournaments and in stacks is to really put them into a stack. I'm not looking for, or I don't think you should be really focused on, is this tight end of value when you're playing in a tournament? You're like, is this tight end going to score me fantasy points? That's what you're looking for. That's why Komet and these lower price guys are guys we talk about in cash, because they get 9 points. Whatever, it's fine. We don't care. But you want the tight end to actually help your lineup if it can. So if you're building a stack with Dak Prescott doubles, okay, who do you want to bring it back with? Zach Ertz. Like, if you're not going to bring it back with Dalton Schultz, or he's not going to be in your lineup with Dak Prescott, it makes sense to use Ertz as the target share leader on the Arizona Cardinals. He's not going to be covered by Trevon Diggs. Like, we know that for sure. Yeah. And Christian Kirk has been really up and down this year. So instead of kind of wasting a receiver spot on Christian Kirk at 5,800, where there are a ton of receivers in that range that you can play, that I think you would just rather play in a vacuum over Kirk to get the correlation. You play Zach Ertz and you kind of get rid of the tight end position in the process, because like tight end is gross, like usually. And I think that's really important why you want to pay up in most cases in tournaments, because if they hit, you're going to just have a massive leg over the field, because most people are trying to punt off the position. So, but if Gronkowski gets 30 points, like I think Kittle call was really, really sharp. You know, Trey Lance, if he has a tournament winning performance, yes, he's probably going to do some damage on the ground, but chances are he probably brings at least one receiver with him, like we saw with Huntley a couple weeks ago, and it was Mark Andrews. So if you're going to bet on Ayuk, Debo, or George Kittle, like you got to just, you know, plant your flag on one guy. And honestly, tight end is harder to parse through anyway, so you might as well just pick Kittle as a guy that he doesn't even need a lot of targets to be super productive, and that's kind of what you're looking at with a Trey Lance. A Trey Lance-led offense is fewer passing attempts. Yeah. So you're not going to see Debo get 10 targets or Ayuk get 10 targets. So which one of these guys is the most efficient? And we know, just looking at yards per route run every single season, who's number one? Mr. George Kittle. So yeah, I like that call on George Kittle, especially stacking him with Trey Lance. Because I think most people will just play Trey Lance naked, because they'll be like, I don't know who to stack him with. But I think that gives you an edge. Again, obviously it's riskier, because if you pick the wrong guy, okay, then you kind of wasted a spot, but you're trying to win. And I think that gives you an edge. So Zach Ertz, I think, makes a ton of sense. Hit on Foster Moreau as well. Great matchup against the Colts. And he's kind of already, after he kind of dudded out, filling in for Waller, he started to kind of come on a little bit more, getting more targets in the Raiders offense. So
he's got back-to-back top 10 finishes. Yeah.
So he's been improving. And again, the matchup, the Colts are bad against slot receivers and tight ends. And that's all the Raiders have right now. So you want to play Renfro or Moreau as your two guys to bring back with Jonathan Taylor. And yeah, I think that's really it for the tight end position.
Dude, the Foster Moreau thing, it's like he went 660 with a touchdown in his first game without Waller. And like he just, had a dud in the first game. I was like, wow, Foster Moreau is like now dead to us forever. Like the expectations were ridiculous. I feel like we've like had situations like Dalvin Cook's out. And so, okay, we'll just put Madison in the top 5. Like it truly isn't that different. Like we've seen it from Madison. He has that workload and everything. People were trying to do that with like Waller to Moreau. And it's like, come on now, this is a tight end here. And he's just not nearly as good as Darren Waller. Like let's freaking be honest with ourselves. Take your 1 game sample size and go straight to hell, man. Like come the hell. I've never seen people like so confidently tout a 1 game sample. Like, well, look at week 5. How could he possibly bust? So now that I got that off my chest. All right, quickly on defense, as I like to do, just pointing out some RB DST stacks that I think could go ahead and work out well, based on their opponent, based on the projected game script. As we know, defenses and running backs tend to correlate fairly well, because, when you get up in the game, then you start to run the ball. And as we see, some old boomer sports reporter every like month or so make the mistake, no, 20 carries doesn't lead to the win, but wins usually do lead to 20 carries and a good defensive effort along the way. So with that in mind, I think Josh Jacobs and the Raiders D, if Carson Wentz is out. Again, it's Sam freaking Ellinger, dude. Like we just saw what Ian Book and like how he sank Alvin Kamara in that entire offense against, the Dolphins. It's slightly better defense. Not a 1-for-1 example, but Josh Jacobs, anytime we have a running back that can get 20 plus carries, and now in a game where they'd be facing a backup quarterback, I think there is a potential in a tournament for that to come to fruition. Jonathan Taylor and the Colts D, same thing on the other side. We've certainly seen Derek Carr have a bad game or two, particularly in recent months. Austin Eckler and that Chargers D going up against my guy Drew Lock. Drew Lock had 0 turnovers last week. I don't exactly see that happening 2 games in a row. With Eckler, I don't think his roster, or what is his rostership at? It's pretty high. It's always pretty high.
It's above 10. I think it's 11%. It's above 10%.
That's not bad though. Like usually Usually I'm seeing it push 20 more than not. So if you want to go, I mean, it's 11%. It's no reason to fade the man. So I'll give me Eckler and the Chargers D against Drew Lock again. I think that makes a lot of sense. David Montgomery and that Bears D against the Giants. Don't think we need to explain that one too much. He is going to be chalky in tournaments, but hey, man, if it's a chalky guy and he scores you 25 points, who freaking cares at that point? Rashaad Penny and the Seahawks defense going against the Lions. Talked about him a bunch already. And if you are going to go the Sony Michel route, why not throw the Rams D out there as well? It doesn't look like Lamar is going to be out there. He practiced on Wednesday, was limping all over the place, and then registered DMP on Thursday. So yeah, Josh Johnson, Tyler Huntley, they haven't sucked, but these are also backup quarterbacks. Like, we can't just assume that this one game that we've seen from both, where they did play well, is going to, continue to lead to a great performance, particularly when you're facing Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. Like, this isn't a Josh Jacobs Raiders defense play where you're hoping on, just truly abysmal offensive production. This is actually a good defense on the Rams as well. Any notes on the defenses here, Andrew, for tournaments?
No, I think the Saints and Panthers are both kind of interesting. Neither are really getting much rostership. I think they both are at sub 7%. And I mean, you got the Panthers are a good defense, and they're playing Taysom Hill, and the Saints are playing Sam Darnold. And look, if you've been listening to this podcast all year long, we were not fooled by the Sam Darnold start. Like, we knew all along he was a fraud. So yeah, Saints defense, fire him up.
I was somewhat fooled thinking that maybe one competent receiver could emerge. I thought DJ Moore, with those crazy target and air yard shares he had early on, could keep on keeping on. But nope, Sam Darnold even took DJ from us. Thanks a lot, Sam. Yeah, three games this week with a game total under 40. Dolphins and Titans at 39.5. Panthers, Saints at 37.5. Giants, Bears at just 37. So
that's the 37 is the lowest of the year.
Lowest of the year. I'm not freaking surprised, man. Like, if Red Zone just ignores that game, I would not be mad. All right, Andrew. Usually, and again, like, we always prepare our notes kind of separately to, really get the creative juices going. We don't want to just be cheating out here, but we usually have a good amount of the same cash plays, maybe a couple tournament ones here or there. First time of the year, though, that we have the exact same favorite stack of the week. So how about that? Let the people know who we're trying to stack and who we're bringing it back with as our favorite tournament options.
Yeah, we got the Matthew. We gave you the Joe Burrow doubles last week, and now we're coming back with, hey, worked against the Ravens. Let's bring it back. Matthew Stafford doubles, Cooper Kupp, OBJ. Bring it back with Mark Andrews. Look, I mean, when Tyler Huntley's a quarterback, Mark Andrews gets more targets. Like that's a good thing for him. Like, that dude is on fire. I don't see why. I mean, he's the number one tight end going up against the number one wide receiver on the other side of the football. I mean, Cooper Kupp is just, he's in fuego right now. Like, don't fade Cooper Kupp. Like, he's not going to, like, next year, sure, maybe it'll come down, but the next two games, like, it's not stopping. Like, if it hasn't stopped over 16 weeks, why would it stop in week 17? That's what I'll say. So Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, OBJ. Again, if you want to make two lineups and make one with Van Jefferson and OBJ, I think that makes a lot of sense as well. But right now, with OBJ and Van Jefferson are both projected to be under 5%. I mean, I prefer, similar to you, I just prefer Beckham. And
sprinkle them, like, OBJ and Beckham. Like, if you're just looking for a random wide receiver in all your other tournament lineups, I absolutely love both of those guys. Like, I lean OBJ, Andrew, but I think I have them, like, right next to each other in my actual wide receiver ranks. Like, I think you'd be hard pressed to, like, really make a strong rational argument for why one should be ranked significantly higher than the other. Stafford, Kupp, we'll lean OBJ, bring that shit back with Mark Andrews. Now, Andrew, 1-1 last week. On the props, you missed the Cordero Patterson rushing over, which isn't your fault. What the hell, Atlanta? 8 touches for Cordero Patterson. That's just freaking stupid. So missed that one, but you did nail Jerry Jeudy under 4 receptions. What do you have on the docket for the loyal listeners this week?
Yeah, so this one, I'm just really surprised that it hasn't changed since I bet it earlier in the week. So it's Josh Allen. His passing yards prop is at 255 yards against the Atlanta Falcons. And I don't know. I don't know why the line is set like that. If I'm missing out that, like, Buffalo, there's like a blizzard going to be happening, then that's why I'm going to be wrong at this point. Like, to my knowledge, there's no blizzard reported in Buffalo, which could be the only reason I don't think that this hits. But I mean, it's the Atlanta Falcons and it's Josh Allen. Like, it's one of the most pass-heavy offenses. Even when they've been involving Devin Singletary more in the offense over the last couple of weeks, they're still throwing at a top 10 rate in neutral game script. And even when they're leading, like, they're still throwing the ball a ton. He has all of his receivers back. they're going to put AJ Terrell to lock down Emmanuel Sanders. Great job. Like, get his PFF grade up, and then Stephon Diggs is going to go over against whoever else, and he's just going to dominate. So I think that Josh Allen over 255.5 passing yards is a lock. And I know that the Falcons defense has had a surge the last couple of weeks. I mean, if you look at the quarterbacks they played, just garbage, like garbage guys. So Josh Allen's in a total different stratosphere than those players. So I think Josh Allen over 255.5 passing yards is just way too low. I just don't know why it's. I mean, he threw for 300 yards, over 300 yards against the Patriots, who were the best pass defense in the league.
And if there is an offense that's just gonna keep throwing the ball even when they're up by 28, it's probably the freaking Bills. Exactly.
It was just way too low, and I'm just like so surprised. Like, I bet it earlier in the week thinking, oh man, this is gonna get like hammered. It's gonna move up to like 300, and it's still at this time of recording still at 255.5 passing yards. And I like to parlay it with a Cordero Patterson under 42.5 rushing yards if you want to get some correlation parlays, because the Falcons are trailing. It means they're not running the football. So That's my first one. And then the second one is an under Marvin Jones Jr. under 45.5 receiving yards. So he's hit this in 3 of his last 9 games, and he's done it against the Jets, 49ers, and Titans. None of those defenses are even close to what the Patriots have on defense, as they've allowed the 4th fewest receiving yards and fewest receptions per game to opposing wide receivers. I can make the argument that since Urban Meyer got fired, Marvin Jones isn't even the number 1 receiver on his team. Laquan Treadwell's been running more routes. Laquan Treadwell has more receiving yards than Marvin Jones does over the last 2 weeks. I expect Marvin Jones to see more coverage from J.C. Jackson, who has allowed the league's 2nd lowest passer rating when targeted this season, 47.5. So, yeah, I mean, anytime I can take unders on dusty receivers that are way past their prime, I just hammer them. So Marvin Jones under. I hit on all the Emmanuel Sanders unders last week. It felt great. So bringing it back with Marvin Jones.
Man, yeah, okay, Trevor Lawrence, 280 passing yards. Like, I'm happy he threw for 280 passing yards against the Jets last week. Like, that's how bad it's been, man. Because the worst part about him and Zach Wilson this year, look, we've seen quarterbacks on bad teams still be okay enough fantasy guys. Like, not that we were touting either Lawrence or Wilson much throughout the summer, but I don't necessarily hate on people that did, because when you look at them, it was like, okay, well, there's some receivers out there, theoretically, when they're not getting hurt or anything. So the idea was like, okay, they'll be bad, but that means they'll be forced to throw a lot. And they have been forced to throw a lot. They just haven't done anything in garbage time. So Fields has been able to an extent. For some reason, Lawrence and Wilson have not. So Marvin Jones under 45.5 receiving yards. Josh Allen over 255.5 passing yards. Heard it from the prop prophet himself. Everyone, that is going to wrap up this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure you go to pff.com, check out all of Andrew's work, start them and sit them, buy low and sell high targets based on high value opportunities, fantasy football ranks, and always with your waiver wire pickups. Andrew, you got your cheat sheet coming out too. Anything else you want to get off your chest?
I'm starting Trey Lance, and I think every single 2 quarterback league that I'm left in, and I'm just praying that Jimmy Garoppolo's thumb isn't miraculously cured by Sunday, or else I'm gonna start Drew Lock again. And I just rather not. Even though, did you see Drew Lock's PFF grade last week? He was the number 2 graded quarterback last week.
Yeah, well, I don't like to reference our grades when we got stuff like that going on.
Well, I just thought it was interesting because they definitely tried to establish the run. That's what they tried to do.
Yeah, they sure did. I too am in deep with Trey Lance. Rare opportunity, Andrew. The Kings Classic stuff we went to Canton for. Have a chance, champ status in the championship in the snake and auction. I got Trey Lance going in both. Come on, Trey. That'd be awesome. I just want to get those 2 belts, stand up there like Conor McGregor, and apologize to absolutely fucking nobody. So that's how I'm hoping this weekend goes out. People, I hope that you have found this podcast useful. Andrew and I put our heart and soul into trying to help you guys get that money, cash in tournaments alike. So if you've enjoyed the podcast and hey, maybe, you're just now rolling in money, want to give back just a little bit, well, we got a deal for you, because for a limited time, you can get 50% off any PFF Elite subscription using code ELITEUP. All the information we've been telling you about rostership, our overall thoughts on the player. A lot of this is behind a paywall, our player rankings, all that. This will give you all that and much, much more. Also have our NFL and college football betting dashboards. NFL Green Line is up 27 units this season. College Green Line up 32 units. Obviously our grades, player prop tool, much, much more. Again, a Christmas gift to you and also supporting the pod. People helping people, and you're becoming a smarter football fan. So use promo code ELITEUP for 50% off an entire year of PFF Elite. So thank you as always for tuning in. For Andrew, I'm Ian. Until next time, take care, everybody.